Hello and welcome to the next lesson of Cylinder Radio. Today, my guest is Mikaela Bearpaw, and we're going to talk about Native American issues and Native Americans and the best way to approach that topic that seems to be forgotten a lot in the conversation. So, Mikaela, can you introduce yourself to my audience and tell us who you are and what makes you a good person to talk to about Native American issues?
Okay, so I'm Mikaela Bearpaw. I am obviously Native American. My tribe is traditionally called Yahaviatum or the Serrano Indians in Southern California. I got involved in politics earlier this year, and I've kind of just been launched to a seat of popularity on speaking on, I guess, conservative Native issues or libertarian, from a libertarian standpoint. And what makes me an authority or someone to talk to, I don't think anybody's really an authority on anything. We all have our different viewpoints, and everybody's worth listening to. And I'm just another one of those people. I have my viewpoint, but I guess I bring a younger take to issues, as I'm in a younger generation than most elders you hear speak from Native America. And I also bring a small percentage of a conservative take that, you usually only hear the socialist Sanders supporting natives speak. They don't usually give a what would be the soapbox to people like me. So for a different viewpoint, I guess that's why people like to listen to me.
Yeah, well, that fits kind of my whole theme, of trying to just confuse people about, oh, this group thinks this way. It's like, nah, we're individuals. We think differently.
There's always one sheep.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think we all are. Right? When you boil it down, especially if you're thinking for yourself and you're trying to be true to yourself.
Right.
So the first question, when I do want to talk about Native American issues in general, and I said this before I started recording, but I think it's really important that I recognize, not just with you on a personal level, but just to the audience in general, just because you fit into one sort of box or you are this label or whatever it is, does not mean you speak for everyone who is that. And that's a trap that people fall into, myself included, when you aren't familiar with individuals. So if you don't have, let's say, Black friends, then you go, oh, Black people think this way. But as soon as you get a diverse group of friends, you go, oh, they're individuals. They all think differently. They all have their different experiences and stuff like that. So I do want to preface with that. I think that's important. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the first question is what term do you prefer, or what have you heard, or do we use? Is it Native American Indian? Is it American Indian? Is it Native American? Is it just Indian? Is it First Nations is like the trendy one that I've heard that sounds pretty good.
Indigenous.
Yeah. What is it?
I mean, this is really a case-by-case basis. I have seen very high up, powerful Native leaders be totally fine with being called American Indian and Native American and Indigenous. And then you have some people who don't want to be called that because whatever their personal issue with it is. I don't think there's one right answer to that. It's basically however that person feels. I personally do not care what you call me. It's they all fall, unless you're going to call me a savage, then we might have, some throwback issues.
What
they want their term back. But
if you're a tennis player, though? What if you're crushing on the tennis court and they say, "Oh, she's playing savage"? That would get really tough, yeah. Right? Like, whoops. I mean,
yeah. I call myself Native American a lot, or American Indian.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because maybe it's just again one of those things where I've talked to people who they are Black and they say, don't call me African American because I'm not African. My family's from the West Indies or something like that. So yeah, it's a case by case basis. I think that's a good thing for just the audience in general to understand is get to know people and talk to people. And I think, me being white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant male, like, all of that is a lot of people like me maybe are hesitant to ask those questions because it's uncomfortable. Like, what do I call you by?
My side of the table makes it uncomfortable because everybody thinks that what they prefer to be called is what all natives prefer to be called. So when you have people like you who come and they want to know, they're hesitant because they're like, what if I say the wrong thing because this person said that was okay, but the other person said it wasn't okay? And it's like, can we all just chill out and realize that it's not that big of an issue?
Yeah, well, it's scary, especially when you're like maybe not me, but when you're trying to be a kind person and you don't want to offend people, you go really careful, and then you get mixed up, and you can't just have a dialogue. So I think that's actually a great response. It's just case by case basis. You try out something, a common phrase, and then you can just get to know the person, talk to them, and then eventually maybe
ask them what they want to be called.
Yeah.
If they're like me, they'll call me whatever you want. I don't care.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's good. So, I guess it would be then. So Native Americans would be, you said, about 2% of the American population.
Yeah.
Does that include people who are like half, like HAPAs?
So that includes people who are actually enrolled in the tribe.
Oh, wow.
Federally recognized tribe.
Wow,
There are
tribes
that are still trying to be federally recognized, and they have to go through a lot of red tape and long processes to get that. So those people aren't included. And then if you have your 23andMe test results and it says you're part whatever tribe, Blackfeet, that also does not count. Actually, most tribes won't even take that into consideration to be enrolled in a tribe. You have to have, it's different from tribe to tribe, but you generally have to have paperwork or a blood relative that can vouch that you're actually from this line. And then each tribe also determines how much percentage of Native you have to be even considered to be enrolled in the tribe. Some are 100%, some are 10%, some are 50, it varies. So yeah, that's also another issue. Most people don't know that Native Americans are the only ethnicity in the United States that actually have their blood quantum tracked, like how much you are of something by the government. Nobody else in the United States has that. Black people, white people, Asians, just natives. So we all have to have a card and a blood quantum result test that the government keeps that says how much Native I am.
Well, I did not know that. So what is this? So where does that, is that like a thing that dates back to trying to get?
No, I actually looked a few months ago, and I'm so bad at remembering these dates, but it is older. The reason they do it, in my opinion, is so that eventually, whenever the bloodline is cut so much, they kind of have a position to say, you guys aren't really that Native anymore. We don't really have to acknowledge our treaties of giving you education and healthcare and billions of dollars a year when you're only 1% Native. So it's a giant debated topic in Native America, whether or not tribes, how they should handle this, because it's the tribes who decide how much percentage you have to be Native. And so some say, we should bring our quantum all the way back up to 100% and turn that into the government and say everybody from here on out is 100% Native to kind of push back that inevitable result. And then some people say, oh, well, it's not really the blood, it's more our culture. So we're going to go the route of just kind of letting it die off and try and make the argument one day that it's just our culture and not our blood, which I personally think is a failure waiting to happen. So yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So do you have to get blood drawn?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, yeah. Wow.
Know that.
Yeah, I did not know that. That's interesting. I'm gonna like dive into that on my own just to like learn more and share that.
Quantum. That's what they call it.
Yeah. So 2%, that's like 6 million plus people.
Yeah. We're roughly the same percentage as the Jewish population, actually.
Yeah, I thought it was way smaller.
Well, it used to be. So like right before the World War, we kind of were almost died off as a people. But I think because of the better relations after the World War and allowing natives to become citizens, because they weren't citizens until after the First World War, I think that helped, like sociologically speaking, or sociology or whatever, and the government speaking, how they were treated in the public, and because they were looked at as, we fought alongside you in the war, you helped us in the war, we had the
big time.
Yeah. So that helped bring back the population. Most people don't even know that we weren't citizens until then. We actually didn't even have freedom of a religion until I think the late 70s or early 80s. And natives couldn't even vote in all 50 states until the 70s. The last was, I think, Hawaii. So really a recent transition, having all the same rights as everybody else for Native population. And I think that's why you're starting to see the Native population grow again.
Well, and also I think this says something about media in general. You know, I mean, if you say it's the same size population as like the Jewish population or other, you know, smaller groups that are more heavily represented, you know, your reality is what you see. So what you see on TV, what you see on the newspaper, you know, so people who are held in a lower place in society or aren't able to get to those positions or don't have advocates in those positions, then they're just not on, they're not in your periphery. You just don't see them, then you don't think about them.
And we're really not represented when it comes to Hollywood and media. I mean, Saturday Night Live just did a Thanksgiving comedy skit, and they had, I think, 7 actors all dressed up as natives, but there was no in it. And most movies, they usually hire the same 2 to 3 native actors, even though there's a lot of them, as if those are the only ones they can hire. And sometimes they don't even, like Twilight, the wolf guy Jacob was just a white kid that buffed up and got a dark tan. They didn't even bother to hire a native guy. So we're really not represented in media, and we're hardly represented in the government, which is interesting to compare to the Jewish population, who's pretty much the same as us, and they make up the majority of the government, and most of them have, like, most our Congress has dual citizenship to Israel. The Jewish population also reigns in Hollywood and law as doctors, and you hardly see native presence in most of these fields, which is pretty interesting. So people almost forget, I feel like, that we're even here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I've taught it like that in the past, where it's like, you know, and I'll get to the education part of it, but like where it's like, you know, where are these people? Because I teach about, and I guess I can get to the next thing of, you know, what's the best way to teach this? So I'll tell you kind of how I'm doing it, and you can pick out how I'm probably screwing it up, because I'm sure I am somehow. But essentially, Christopher Columbus sails the ocean blue. He gets here, and the original narrative was there was nothing here, where in reality there were tens of thousands of people here. There were, I mean, it was actually millions of people. It was heavily populated, and there was everything from small tribes to big tribes to massive cities to, you know, great architecture that's still standing. Like, it was a very diverse population, hundreds of languages, different skin tones, and it was a really diverse population here. And that's just not part of it. It's just like he came here, and then European settlement happened, and then there were a few, you know, maybe in the plains hunting bison, living in teepees. But that's, I think, just trying to show I don't spend a whole lot of time on it, but what I do bring up is that there was a lot here. There were a lot of people who have been here for thousands of years.
American history did not begin in 1492.
Right.
And they teach it like that. Even I got taught that when I was little. And I was actually homeschooled with a curriculum that I had to go through. And I just did not even get taught Native history. It was, most of it I learned when I was older. And then I'm thinking, when these holidays go by, I'm like, how are we okay with just completely erasing the history that used to be here? Or even like with Thanksgiving, for instance, or let's take Columbus Day, because we were just talking about that. Okay, Columbus Day is like this, okay, this is the day that Columbus sailed the ocean blue and he discovered America, and there would be no America if it wasn't for Columbus. That's why he deserves to have a holiday. And for me, I look at it as, well, why don't we give Leif Erikson a holiday? Because he was here, you know, 1,000 years before Columbus, and we have structures that he built. Or why don't we talk about the native population that made this continent quite advanced? It may not have been the advanced population in the same terms as Europe, to how they had things, but it was advanced. Like you said, there was trade routes, there were buildings that we don't even really understand how they built some of these things. There were different cultures, there were different languages. They had government systems of their own. They had property rights. They had everything that Europe had in a different perspective. But yet we're kind of just taught that it was just this grunt, savage lifestyle where everybody was just, you know, farm and die.
Yeah, right. Well, it gets into this. It's like a tough balance, I think, because you know, I promote the idea that Western culture has brought a lot of wonderful things to the world. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful things that have come from it. I read Steven Pinker's book about, violence and how it's been reduced and things like that. So how do you balance, like, yes, that's true, and what's true is that came at an expense to a lot of people, and it came at expense to, indigenous people. It came at expense through slavery, and that balance. I think that what happens in politics and discussions is Western culture is all good, and look at all the wonderful advancements we have in medicine and stuff like that, or it's all bad. Look at the horrible genocide that we've done, and the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? But I don't know where that balance lies.
I always try to remind people that we can learn lessons in the darker part of history, and we don't have to learn to be victims in the darker part of history, which is what I think the other extreme does. It's just all victimization, and look how horrible the genocide was, and this is a great reason to be bitter forever. And then you have the other end of it, like you said, which is rah, rah, America, we're the greatest civilization and country in the world, and God created us, and all the founding fathers were just angelic creatures, and that's how it was, and let's just all completely forget about these tiny little minute details that don't really matter because look at what we got out of it.
Yeah.
Rob the people of lessons by taking both extremes. Where it is in the middle, like you said, where you're strong enough to look at the history and see the positives, but also see the negatives and see are the lessons you can derive out of that. How can we get the positive without having to do that negative again? And you can't really know that unless you look at what happened. So you can't know that unless you look at the real relation. You can't really know the real lesson of Thanksgiving unless you look at the real relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag Indians at that time, and what happened afterwards and what happened before. People like to look at history with this needlepoint vision, or just like very skewed, and they want to take a tiny little lesson from this 50-year gap, but they don't want to look at what happened before and what happened after. And I think that's a disservice to the young, in my opinion. We're erasing history by doing that, by being so scared to be offended or to offend. We rob ourselves of lessons.
Yeah, and the nuance is really, that's my podcast. That's all I do on social media, and all the stuff is, I love the nuance, like that little stuff, and wrestling with this is complicated. That's good stuff. But I think a lot of people don't. They want the quick, bite size. It's good or bad. It's binary. Just give me it's good or bad, and I'm going to move on. So that goes to our politicians. This person's good. This person's bad. Orange man good. Orange man bad type of stuff, as opposed to there is complicated nature, and we can have conversations and work through that complication, and the bad, okay, well, let's move that over a little bit to the good side, and the good side, good, let's stick to that. Like, I just don't, from someone like me, I don't understand why people don't want to play in that nuance and wrestle with complicated questions, but that's, I guess, why I'm doing this.
It's uncomfortable. People like to pick their team, and then they like to believe that their team is the good one, because nobody ever wants to think that they were duped. Or that they were silly enough to believe one version and were not smart enough to see the truth in it. So people are very, very arm's length with anything uncomfortable because they don't want to feel stupid. Whereas I think it's a lot stronger to realize that we are all pretty stupid, and there are things that you can learn 24/7, and you're never going to know everything, which is why I say nobody's an authority on anything, in my opinion.
Oh, Mikaela, when I adopted that mentality of like, I have no idea, it has helped me tremendously. Like, just because it's made me curious. And I think curiosity is smart. So I'm just always curious about things, and I love being proven wrong. And if I think something, I'll defend it because I think it's right. But like, if I can be proven wrong, I'll take it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I just saying, like you said, like, we're all kind of stupid. None of us are supreme experts on everything. Most of us are not supreme experts on anything. Like that,
Right.
that frees you up to learn.
Yes. I mean, look through history, the supreme experts on certain topics eventually over time end up being not that smart or disproven, or there was a whole room of things they never thought of. So nobody's ever going to be a final authority.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that you're a little bit more on the conservative side politically, and I've had people on here that really throw a wrench into that kind of stuff. I had Joy Villa on. I've had on Chad from Black Conservative Movement, who's like a 15-year-old Black kid from Georgia who's a diehard Trump supporter. And people are just like really curious because, especially in the more intellectual worlds, the image of what a conservative is fits a very specific box. And, you know, you know, First Nations, Indigenous peoples movements have kind of been dominated, I think, by the, you know, very, you know, woke, very left, like Bernie Sanders type crowd. So are you a bit of a pariah, or is that just among like like your people, or is that not true that most of them are on that side?
No, for sure, most are on the left.
Yeah.
And part of that, I believe, is the fault of the right. The right hardly places a hand out to reach the Native community, because I don't think they view them as a threat voting-wise. And because they're not a threat voting-wise, they kind of just are like, okay, whatever, we'll leave you over there, and nobody will really know that we're ignoring you. But the Democratic Party, I mean, look at Bernie Sanders. He's been touring the Native reservations this year, literally going from reservation to reservation and talking at powwows to the Native people.
Right.
And then you have Elizabeth Warren, who went and apologized to a room of natives, and what's her name, California lady, Kamala Harris. She's also released this whole plan on what her presidency would do for the Native people. And where I think all of them are just flat out liars and they're just trying to get votes, they are at least taking a step towards reaching out and talking, whereas to be really heard from the Republican candidates, nothing. Nothing. I mean, Trump did something this week for the first time in his presidency that was kind of nice, where he signed the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Women's Act, where he's going to siphon or ask Congress to siphon off our appropriate funds towards stopping the vast murders of missing and murdered Indigenous women that's going on in America right now. And at the same time, I think he declared Black Friday as Red Friday. It's now Indigenous Peoples Day. So those were two big things he did.
Okay.
But for me, it's kind of like look here and don't look here, because I posted on my page like last week. Most people don't know this, but he actually took thousands of acres from the Wampanoag, I always say it wrong, but you can look it up, Wampanoag Indians, who are the Thanksgiving tribe from the Thanksgiving story. What happened under Obama was he was going to give them back thousands of acres of their own land so that they could have economic progress, because most reservations suffer from a lack of economic progress or dirt poor. And they went through all the work to design a casino and a gas station and all this different stuff they were going to do to create business. And Obama goes out of office, and Trump reverts his order and takes back all the land and is selling it off to oil and gas companies for the highest bidder.
Yeah, I mean,
that's nice. How come that wasn't in the news, but this thing over here is in the news? Which, by the way, most missing and murdered Indigenous women are going missing and murdered near oil man camps, which are oil pipeline camps where they're building the oil pipelines that Trump has passed throughout his presidency across lands. So it's like, okay, yeah, you don't want missing, murdered Indigenous women. That's nice, but you're also putting in the environment strongly for where this is happening. So it's kind of like I said, it's a look here, don't look here. Native people aren't stupid. Like they see those two intricacies of it. The average American non-native public or Republicans, they just look at it and they're like, oh, look how nice he's being to the natives. Isn't that nice? Why don't they vote for him? So yeah, this is why I think they lean left, because they don't get any real outreach from the right.
Well, yeah, I've talked to Black friends of mine who, like, you know, it's something like 40% or more of African Americans identify as conservative, but not Republican. And part of the reason that I've talked to a bunch of them is they're like, well, it might be virtue signaling, but at least it's signaling. Like at least the left is doing, at least the Democrats are doing something, even if it's nonsense, even if it is, you know, from their view, like, you know, not sincere. At least it's something. And so, okay, they're trying. You know, like that seems to be a common theme that I've heard from them as well.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't Trump also do something where he like gave like some sort of award to Indigenous peoples, and like he was in front of Andrew Jackson painting or something like that?
So that was the Navajo code talkers, who I don't know if you know
that's right.
about them. the Navajo code talkers were the ones who were responsible for helping America win the war.
Yeah.
I think it was the
Huge.
Japanese who were breaking all of the codes that they were sending, and they were kind of hit a corner where they didn't know what to do, and they went and got the Navajo Indians to help send messages back and forth in the Navajo tongue, and nobody could break that, of course, because it was a natural tongue, which was kind of funny because most of those Navajo code talkers had grown up in forced boarding schools. So the America used to take Native children and force them to go to boarding school miles away from their home, like even in other states, not let them speak their language, not let them have their hair long. They had to wear white people clothes, get a Christian name. And so most of those code talkers went through those schools where they weren't allowed to speak their language, but then lo and behold, 20 years later, the government needs them to speak their language to win the war. And they're like, oh, thank you for that. We'll give you a little award there.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is Trump gave those people an award standing in front of the painting of Andrew Jackson.
Who did the Trail of Tears. That's what that's like one of his big things in history.
Come on. It's a little bit weird. Where was his PR here?
Well, yeah, I think it's just very Trump, where it's just, I don't know. I talk about him a lot because I'm a government teacher and it's all over the place. I think a lot of it is just him being oblivious. He's thinking about Trump and he doesn't recognize his surroundings, I'm sure. Unless they're mirrors.
He also said it's his favorite president, so.
Andrew Jackson?
Yeah, that's why his painting was in the Oval Office.
Oh, I thought he would say his favorite president is himself.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he will in the next term.
Yeah.
Elected.
So what with the issue with where a lot of people know of Native Americans now is it comes up with like the casinos and like reservations are still like a thing. I watched the movie, I think it was Wind River, it was called.
Yeah, it was a great movie.
Yeah, it was a good movie. But and that actually involved a woman who was killed by like.
Yeah, it's actually one of the stories of the missing and murdered indigenous women.
Oh, it's like loosely based on a true story?
It is, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie. But as far as like can you just give us a little bit, more than I do, and I think you know more than a lot of people who are listening. Like what are reservations? Like what does that look like? I know that it's not generally very good, the situation there, but I don't know. And then what is also the situation with casinos? So just reservation and casinos, because that's like the big kind of place where people talk about it. And I just want to, maybe you can educate us a little bit on this.
So reservations began sometimes willingly, sometimes not, when the government was slowly encroaching upon the native population and taking land. A lot of the time they would make an agreement with the tribe. If you guys go over here onto this reservation, we will give you education and food and health for the rest of your lives. That will be the treaty that we sign. And that's usually why tribes ended up on these reservations. It was an exchange of freedom for government assistance, basically. And a lot of the time they didn't have an option. It's like be killed or get this government assistance and stuck on this little res. And so we still have them today. That's where different tribes are located or wherever the government located them, which is usually far away from wherever their homeland, ancestral lands were. And at this point, some are doing well and some are doing horribly. There's over 530 tribes and reservations, so you would kind of have to go through and look at each one. The ones who are doing better, more often than not, have found a way to develop some type of business on their reservation, which is difficult to do because all reservation land is not owned like non-native owns their house, where you buy a house and then you have the property rights. It's held in trust. So the government only holds things in trust with three groups, the mentally retarded, children, and native people. Because it was believed that native people were not intelligent enough to take care of their own things. So the land is still held like that. Nobody has their own property rights. So natives can't get loans. They can't build a house without permission. They definitely can't get a loan to start a business on their land. So everything has to go through the government and getting government approval. Well, during Reagan's time, he actually is the president that gave the rights. I can't remember what it's called right now, but he signed the law that gave permission to Native Americans to start casinos on their land. And he did that so that natives could start having an economy of some sort to take care of themselves rather than just going off the government because it was so poor. And that did do well. There are tribes like in Florida near Miami, Fort Lauderdale. There's one of the biggest casinos there. They just spent billions to create the world's largest guitar hotel and casino. And then there's casinos in Southern California and then up in the upper East Coast. But most people think that all reservations have a casino and they're just all multi-millionaires, which is not true. It's a very, very small percentage. And then from that percentage, there's a very big percentage that have a casino, but they're basically at the mercy of their location. So if they build a casino in the middle of nowhere, how likely are you to drive 3 hours to go gamble?
Right.
So they might have a casino, but they don't have very many customers, and therefore they don't make that much money to begin with. So
how do the laws work? Like, because I've gone to some, I've had friends who do like they like fight and they do them on casinos, on like reservation casinos. And I remember like my buddy who was driving saying something like, "Oh yeah, like the laws are different here." For like I forget exactly what he's saying, but what's the deal with laws on the reservations?
Just laws concerning casinos or just in general?
I think just in I don't know. I guess maybe both.
Well, like one issue with the missing and murdered Indigenous women is that natives don't have their own court system to try somebody. Okay. So if you go and rape somebody on res land, there's no state police there to catch you. There's just whatever the police that the natives have made. And say they arrest you, they can't try you in their own court or have you subject to their own laws, which is why it's part of the argument that there's so many missing and murdered Indigenous women right now, because violent offenders know this, that they have more of a loophole to go and attack people on a res land and not get tried for it or caught, because police can't go into res land without permission.
They can't. So like a state police officer can't go in and arrest a bank robber or something.
Right, which is, it was supposed to be like that because we're sovereign nations and we're supposed to have our own say and our own police and our own court system. But unfortunately, some tribes have their own police, but they can't do much about anything. Which is why actually some natives are not happy about this bill that Trump just signed, where he's supposed to be stopping this jurisdiction issue, like helping native women not be killed, is because I guess it is now leaving a loophole to allow the feds to come on the native land, which is like, an overstep of government. Yeah. And some say it's something he wants for whatever corrupt reason he might want them, because Trump has not had a great relationship with natives in the past. They've always been his competition in casinos, and he's never liked that natives don't have to pay property taxes, but he does. And so that's why natives don't want to vote for him, because they don't know what he's going to do. There's been talks of him possibly privatizing reservations, which means getting rid of the property right or no property tax right, making them susceptible to property taxes, which could largely hurt native reservation economies. For sure. So that's one law difference, is that we don't have to pay property taxes on res land. But generally, you'd have to make what they call a compact agreement with your state. So, okay, you get your casino, you don't have to pay property tax, but since the state is separate from the federal says you're allowed to build a casino, you have to make us happy. And so we want you to give, say, $5 million of your earnings every year to the city to help the city before you guys get to keep any. So that's also another annoying thing. It was meant to be something to help native reservations to get an economy, and also just, you could call it a type of reparations or doing something nice for natives after everything they've gone through. And people think it's really easy, but it's not. They have to make these insane compacts, and sometimes their compacts are more than if they just paid taxes. So that's one law difference.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know. That sounds very Wild West-ish. I mean, just the fact that, if you just jump someone on the street and hit them over the head with a pipe, like you have to rely on the reservation police, and who knows how many and how well they're funded and stuff. You can kind of just like then run off the reservation and go into the state, and there's no like extradition or
very underfunded, not trained police, not enough of them to cover such vast areas of res land.
Wow.
You basically need to be arrested by them, and they need to turn you in to state authorities. So yeah, there's all kinds of weird, intricate law differences.
Yeah. So just talking about this, especially with our president now, like, can you, I mean, I go into politics a little bit on this show just because I think it's important because it has to do with why people think what they do. But like, why are you a conservative? Or have some conservative libertarian type leaning? Is it just a distrust of big government? Is that kind of?
Yeah. Well, I personally think that any Native American should have a very, very healthy distrust of the U.S. government
Yeah.
or any large
Yeah.
government in general.
Like,
For
we'll take care of you type of mindset. Like,
yeah, give us your
yeah.
gun, we'll take care of you. Just
Yeah.
go fly out to the Arizona reservations and see how well everybody's taken care of. The Hopi Indian reservation. I mean, they don't have running water. They don't have electricity. They live in trailers because they can't get houses built for them. They don't have heaters. Like, natives are having to take their own money and go chop down wood to give, elders firewood and help them with food. And the food's unhealthy that the government does give them. And natives are already susceptible to diabetes. So this is also a massive issue. Drug abuse is rampant. Fetal alcohol syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's what you said. It's a wild, wild west,
Yeah.
that's my argument is native reservations are a perfect example of what a large government taking care of you can do, which is
Yeah.
basically nothing. So that's one reason why I'm a small government libertarian conservative is because I don't believe in handing all of my well-being over to the government to take care of me. A far-off government who doesn't even know my name or know me as anything other than whatever my blood quantum is. So that's one reason. And then I just also don't like the left's standard that everything is owed to me just because I exist. I think it stifles your ability to earn and excel as a human being and to make yourself greater.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't like things on the right. So I don't like the big war mentality. I don't like funding other countries to death for their own wars. I don't even like the overstep of mixing religion with our government because the majority is Christian. Therefore, we should have all Christian standards in the government. I don't believe it should be like that. So that's why I kind of fall in the middle of things. And then sometimes I'm changing my stance. Like, I used to be completely against all socialist ideas, but now I'm a little bit like, okay, well, I do enjoy my fire department and my police.
Right.
I do think they could be funded more, like a teacher should be paid more than our lame congressman, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, I'll go for that.
Yeah.
You change your mind? How dare you ever change your mind on anything?
Yeah.
And
also my husband's from Belgium, so I go to Belgium a lot, and they're a pretty capitalist socialist country, but they definitely are vastly more socialist than America. And they don't live like a third world. Things are run pretty well there. And they have, their healthcare system's better than ours. It just is. Like my husband's sister, her son, who's 2, he had a brain swelling, like he got liquid in his brain all of a sudden a few months ago, unexpected. He was in the hospital for like 2-3 weeks, constant care. And can you imagine how much that would cost America if they had to pay for that? Well, everything's just covered, period. And that comes out of their taxes. So things like that I see, that you don't ever have to worry about getting sick or whatnot and it not being paid for, not having the perfect health care. That's a great thing I've seen in their system. But then, can it work here? So like, I'm always re-examining different subjects and getting different opinions on it. I will admit that it works well in Belgium, but then where it doesn't work well is there is no excelling in life. Everybody's equally poor or equally middle class, you could call it.
Yeah.
Their middle classes are poor.
Yeah.
How much people make. So that's one thing. It kind of just tells you from the moment you're born, you don't get to dream bigger than whatever everybody else is doing. So that's one downside to a socialist style country.
Well, I think these are problems that can be solved, but they're complicated problems. Part of what I'm trying to do here with trying to advance education, it's really like the thing that I'm trying to take on and forming a coalition of other open-minded teachers is like, we can solve these problems. And the youth, the kids I teach, they could be the ones that solve it, but it's going to be hard. If these were easy to solve, then they would have been solved by now. So we just have to be okay with the complicated nature, talk it out, and start getting a little bit better, inch by inch. But I think all of these things are solvable. I don't believe that we can't solve the healthcare problem. I think we can. I don't believe that,
Yeah, I think we can.
Yeah.
But we might have to get all of the money hungry politicians and big pharma out of the way, which is like, can you do that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it just has to be, we have to really think outside the box. We have to really, all of us can't be lazy about this. The same way that we're lazy about the way we teach history, maybe we can't be lazy about how to do this. And we all have to be willing to have difficult, get uncomfortable, right? And trying to figure this out. And we have to work for it. We all have to work for it.
The kids you're teaching to fix these kind of things, I think it is going to involve not just teaching that America's the greatest country in the world and leaving it at that and not wanting to look at how actually corrupt America is. And because if you're not willing to look at the corruption, you can't fix it if you don't know it's there. So that's one thing.
And it can be both, like we said, it can be both. It could be the place, the best country in the world to live and vastly need to be improved. Like exactly. that can be, they can coexist with each other.
I also like to say it's subjective. Like being the best country in the world.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That gets me to a point that I wanted to touch on is I gave the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger for summer reading for my civics class. And it's talking about the important close knit nature of that human beings require. And when I say we're the best, but we're also very isolated from each other in a lot of ways where other even might be less materialistically rich countries, they band together and they're together during hard times and they're not alone and they don't have the suicide rates and the depression rates and stuff like that, the heroin overdoses and the mass shootings that we do. So yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for the correction. We are great in a lot of things, but we're falling short in other ways. And in that book, he goes into details about how there was a lot of cases. This was not an isolated incident, but many cases where essentially Dances with Wolves or Avatar, where a white person, an American citizen went west, kind of got into trouble or whatever it was, or just decided to join a tribe and didn't want to return to quote unquote civilization. They wanted to stay there because they felt that it connected with something deep in their genetics, something deep in their soul. So, what is that? How do we assimilate that part of the cultures that we're talking about here? Like your culture, like the Native American cultures that lasted for thousands and thousands of years, that had elements that our modern 2019, 2020 society does not. And I put a lot of the blame of, the depression, the mass shooting, the suicide, the opioid overdoses. I put a lot of that on the missing of the personal connections and the tribe element. People don't have tribes. People don't have people that they can really, they don't have that support. So how do we bring that in? I mean, I don't know. You have just thoughts on that?
On the mass shooting thing, one difference between Native culture and this mass shooting culture we have now is Native cultures didn't have psych drugs, so I think that's part of it. They weren't all doped up on antidepressants. So
all of them. That's important for just me to clarify. When you look at these mass shooting, the perpetrators and stuff, nearly all are on some sort of psychotropic drug.
Yeah, psychotropic drug, or coming off of it or abusing it. Mm-hmm. So almost every single time. Yeah. And nobody talks about it. All they talk about is, should we have guns? Should we not have guns? And I'm like, hey guys, there's actually one thing in common with all of these shooters that isn't a gun and it isn't a crazy person. It's actually psychiatric drug. And why is it that nobody reports on that or talks about it? You got to ask yourself. Maybe because it's the largest funded corporation in the world, Drug Inc. But
the lobbyists. They have 1,500 lobbyists. They have 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. I'm sorry.
But back to
yeah, sorry.
Combining Native culture to modern day culture, what we can learn from it. I think one thing that I really appreciate about Native culture is how much they respect and listen to and honor their elders, as opposed to the Western society, which kind of, when your elders get older, you just kind of throw them in an old person's home and you hardly see them because you're so busy, and it's like, oh, we got to hear from grandpa again. It's like nobody really cherishes the wisdom that the elders have in a Western society. It's just kind of a pain. Like, you like to see them on holidays, but other than that. So that's one huge difference, is how well regarded elders are in Native culture. And I think that brings a lot of strength to society, is learning real history from them and their lessons. And when you do away with that, you're kind of just, kind of running without parents.
Yeah.
That's one thing I really like. And then the other thing I had it in my head, now I'm forgetting. Let me think. Darn, I blanked. It was a good one too.
Well, just like, how do we go from, because maybe it's a pain that, your grandma Estelle is going to be around. Yeah.
Greed. I think greed is also a huge thing. If you look at the history between the Pilgrims and the Separatists and the people that came over, compared to Native culture as it was, and Native culture even as it still wants to be, is they are not a consumer society. It's not a consumer culture. It's you farm your crop, you harvest your crop, you let the land rest, and you thank Mother Earth for what you have, and you plan for the next year. And when the Pilgrims came over, they really didn't get that. At first they did. They're like, oh, this is quaint and nice, but natives were producing, I think it was 3 times as much crop as opposed to Europe when they came here, and they couldn't understand how they did it. They're like, you guys are creating so much profit here. Why aren't you making profit on it? And they said, well, you have to let the land rest. You have to let it rest, and that's how it works for you. Well, the Pilgrims actually didn't like that. So they just started using up their land that they were letting rest to build more crops. And that was actually part of some of the beginning wars were over that. It was uncomfortable. And it was that idea of profit and consumerism and work, 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 as opposed to producing only what you need to eat and make it through the winter, and being thankful and letting it go there. And I think you can kind of still see the butting of heads between the two cultures, even in this day. That culture of just producing what you need, or getting what you need, and being happy with family, and through the winter time, and just being settled, is not an American culture. The American culture that won was the European culture that came over, of profit and stores open 24/7, and letting crony capitalism run the world, basically. So I think they could use a little bit more of that traditional Native culture that was anti-consumerism in the modern day, to kind of put reins on this horrible, massive, bought-out government system that we have now, that is driven by crony capitalism and lobbying, like you said, and corporations being viewed as individuals. So
yeah, that aligns with my podcast with Kyle Carter about the American dream of what is this? Like, we want to get the new Audi, and we want to get the corner office, and we want like the newest iPhone. We need the new, like, all of that stuff. All of this comfort is making us very uncomfortable. So much so that we got to take meds so that we can crack a smile.
Right?
So what's going on? We have to be willing to get uncomfortable in order to get comfortable. And that sounds really silly, but it's true. Like, there's something to, I like hunting, for example, because I believe that if you go out and you work for that food, and you have to carry this stupid, like you take the animal, and you're like, wow, thank you for giving your life. And now I got to carry this weight out. Like, you work for it, you appreciate it more, and it's harder. You can't just, gorge yourself on it, but everything's so easy. We have to be willing to get a little uncomfortable. One of the best ways to conserve energy, just turn your thermostat, a little bit colder in the winter, and a little bit hotter in the summer. You'll conserve a lot of energy, but people don't want to get uncomfortable. And that's really at the core of what a lot of this is. It's giving up your comfort, getting uncomfortable is going to be your pathway to something better, which sounds counterintuitive to a lot of people. But I think those of us who have learned about this or experienced it know that that's true.
Oh, it is. I totally agree with everything you just said.
So just in closing, like, what would you say, like, what do we do? Because you shine some light on some things here that I'm excited to go learn. I'm gonna probably sick a bunch of my students, my minions, on like, let's learn about this stuff together. But I think the traditional route is let's get mad over the Redskins name. And I'm not, and like that's something that it could be very legitimate. But what will really, like, if they change it from the Redskins to the whatever, the Pine Cones or something like that, then how is that helping? I like that sign. So how is that going to help really?
America, Indian country.
Yeah. How do we help? How do we really improve this significant faction of our country that is forgotten in many ways, that is not, treated equally? We believe in the 14th Amendment, okay? Conservatives, liberals believe in the 14th Amendment. All laws apply to all people, equal protection of the law, and that is not happening. So what can we do? Like, what is it? Is it lobby? Is it make phone calls? Is it get educated? Is it open businesses and hire indigenous labor in those areas? Because I don't know, maybe there wouldn't be minimum wage laws. I don't know. It might be a great business opportunity. And I don't know. So I'm asking you, like, what are some little steps we can take?
So for me, I always look at it because I get asked that a lot by non-native people. Mm-hmm. And to me, the solutions for natives are natives. You can have these non-natives who are endearing and want to help native people to get them out of their position, but mm-hmm. It's kind of like, how do you help someone who doesn't want to help themselves?
Right.
So I think that's part of the problem in Indian country right now is they like being a victim so much that that's more comfortable. When you're talking about getting comfortable and uncomfortable, nobody wants to get uncomfortable out of their misery. It's uncomfortable for them to be like, I can fix this myself. I don't need the United States. I don't need this charity or that charity. Where we can help policy-wise, I like the idea, and I may change my mind because I've said I like to do that. But right now, from what I've studied, I like the idea of giving native tribes the option to have their property rights or to stay in the land and trust system. I think that some tribes could benefit by leaving the land and trust system to be able to get loans and develop their land and build their own sovereign nation like that. Because you have such an issue with, they call it monetary leakage on reservations. A dollar comes in, but there's no business to spend it. There's no gas stations, there's no grocery stores, there's no basic banks, there's nothing. So it immediately leaves. And you've developed this third world country in a first world nation. And part of that is policy-wise, and you can't do much as a non-native for it. I guess you could call your senators and congressmen if you really think that your phone calls have power. I personally am, not that type of person. I'm like, they're bought off by lobbyists and businesses. And like I don't know if I said this on this podcast, but Native America sits on, I think, 30 to 40% of untouched natural reserves of the United States. The United States cannot touch it until natives are gone. So you are fighting against this system of the government wanting to remove them from the land. And how are they doing it? Some would argue that they're doing it in a very slow process. George Washington talked about it, the slow process of pushing natives out, which is what America has been doing. You place them on reservations, they can't create business, they end up leaving, they end up marrying non-natives, they track their blood quantum so that eventually they can be like, you're not native anymore, we'll take all that oil. We'll take all that gold that's left, So you're fighting such an uphill battle here, and I really think that the only people who can do something about it are natives themselves, like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, realizing that we don't have a seat at the table when it comes to politics because we're too busy, crying over the Redskins and crying over the MAGA hat kids in DC who were yelling, who were smiling at the guy with his drums, like such petty fast food politics, when in the bigger picture, it does not matter. If you want to stay relevant in this first world society, you're going to have to get a seat at the table. The only way to do that is to get our kids involved in politics, to get more native senators, to get more native congressmen, to have more native business, to have a say, that you become so big, you can't get rid of them, And right now, part of the problem is we teach native kids that they have trauma in their DNA permanently. Like, I need to go to therapy. I am basically told I have a handicap from the moment I'm born by reservation psychologists. So that's one massive thing we got to get rid of. Who imagine having a kid from the moment they're born telling them that you're traumatized,
Right.
and they haven't witnessed any of this traumatization. What do you think that's going to do? Native Americans have the highest suicide rate out of any ethnicity in the United States right now, from ages 15 to 24. There's a reason for that. It's because we have no purpose, we have no drive. We're just told that we should feel sorry for ourselves and hate Columbus Day and look at the genocide that happened. It's like, well, what are you doing about it now? You're not doing what you're posting on your iPhone like you hate Columbus. Great. How is that helping your res? So I think the best thing to go forward would be for Natives to start doing it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. As a teacher, it's hard for me to be so laissez-faire. Like, I think that there might be people listening. Like, is there some sort of way that we can not be the great white hope, not be this great white savior, but essentially like empower? Is it to empower these individuals to be able to do it? Like, is there, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't know if it's like, it's not charity, but is it some sort of way that we can like give a bump, but not?
I think a great example for that would be Nixon. I know everybody only likes to think of Nixon as the president that got kicked out, Watergate and whatnot. But Nixon actually grew up near a res, and he had a pretty big Native presence in his childhood and teen years, and he saw what the reservations were like. And so this man went on to be president, and if you study his history of his policies, he was actually one of the best presidents for Natives, period, to date. The policies that he passed helping Native America. So I think one thing, if I was a teacher like you and I had young non-Native students, one thing I would do is try to really teach the honest history, like what you're trying to do now, and even like bust them out to a reservation, show them what these people live like, show them how they think and what's hurting their community, like the stuff I just talked about, like this trauma thing, and really educate people, because you never know who's going to be a congressman, who's going to be the next president, who's going to be all of a sudden placed in a position of power to help people. So, educating yourself is a massive, massive thing. Educating non-whites on Native issues, because that way, maybe they'll come up with a way to fix things or help things, not in the non-white hope way that you said, but in a different way, kind of like what Nixon did or what a lot of people have done. So yeah, there's always something they can do that I'm not thinking of right now.
Right.
So what you're doing is great.
Thank you. Is there a source, like if I want to send people out now to say like, all right, let's go learn about what's going on. What is this? The blood tracking, all this kind of stuff. Other than just Googling it, because even Google, I'm skeptical hippo. I don't know if you've seen that meme, the skeptical hippo, where the hippo is like,
Yeah.
I'm skeptical about what, just the agenda of a lot of Silicon Valley. I'm a little tinfoil hattish about that stuff. So what would be a source where people can find what you would say would be legitimate information on?
There's a book called Reservation Capitalism, which is usually what I suggest to people first. Let me look up the author. I'm Googling it. Let's see. It's this guy,
so you're
right?
here for the first time, 7 years on your own accord.
Ellen came on all of a sudden. I don't know where from where. So it's this. I don't know if you can see it. Probably not. Reservation Capitalism, Economic Development in Indian Country by Robert J. Miller. That is my favorite introductory book. It teaches the history of the Native population, how they were before you white people got here, and how their economic system was, their trade routes, how they actually had a lot of capitalism, because what they teach now in schools is that they were predominantly socialist little tribes, which is not exactly true. And it takes it all the way up until now with solutions on how to fix the monetary leakage, how to fix suicide rates, like all this kind of stuff. It's a great book to start with. And then as far as like data, one thing you have to look at is the BIA's website, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, the BIE. They post a lot of statistics. And then, Indian news sources like Indian Country Today. There's a lot on Twitter, different ones. But, that's where you start, and then you kind of go down a rabbit hole. But it's actually not that easy to find a lot of Native information.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Because we're such a small population,
Right.
and the government has just not deemed us worthy of keeping track of a lot of things. To this day, like I was trying to find how many natives live without homes, that have or homeless or couch surfing. And I found out that within the last 2 years, they've just fudged all the numbers and made them up because they're like, whatever, it's a small population, or somebody messed up their job. They're dealing with archaic computers and they don't know how to use them anymore. And so it's really sad that I have to say that it's really hard to find information on natives, but it is. That's just kind of how it is right now.
Yeah, well, it's not that it's. I'm gonna push back. I don't think that it's a small population. I think it's an unrepresented population.
Yeah,
you know, because again, you could
small in
say
the grander scheme of things, but not small when you look at the actual numbers.
yeah, because even like transgender individuals, I've had on 2 different transgendered people on my podcast in the first like 3 episodes, because it was so pressing of like, all right, this is a group that needs to get to the forefront so we can talk about these issues. And it was kind of like it wasn't until you actually came across my my Instagram and I saw you and I was like, she's interesting. That I was like, oh yeah, I should probably have one on Native American issues. Like, because it's just not, it's just not in our view.
Spectrum, yeah.
Yeah. So where can people find you, follow your stuff? And it's entertaining. Like, you're a trip. So I think it's fun for people to kind of follow what you're up to, and the kind of funny, wacky stuff and the very serious stuff. I think it's a mix what you put out there.
Yeah, that's usually my mother's reaction to stuff I post. She's like, "Oh, that's interesting." Mikaela Bearpaw across everything: Twitter, YouTube, and then Instagram. I did have a Facebook, but I got rid of it because I was getting lots of crazy stalkers on there. Okay. So, and also there's just not very many people on there anymore, I feel like.
Yeah,
so if you want to follow me, it's Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Mikaela Bearpaw.
Okay. Well, any parting words that you want to put out there to the listeners or anything like that?
My biggest thing, like I said, is these topics are very uncomfortable for people, but if you would just get over it and start to realize that the bad history is good history for lessons, then you can start to educate yourself on the real situation of Native America right now, and without taking sides, and just making up your mind for your own, and keep researching.
Awesome. Well, that is so in line with everything that I'm doing. So thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy lady, so thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to come and talk to me. I really appreciate it, Mikaela.
Well, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.